Today we are going to talk about spaghetti bias and the different ways that you can use it, and also how you can make your own spaghetti bias and how you can apply it easily for various projects. So this is my Bee-utiful Pinafore dress that I sell in my Etsy shop. And you can see we've got the bias trim at the hemline and up above, and also it's used as the embellishment for the little leaves for the yo-yo flowers. So this is a great way that you can really jazz up a hemline with spaghetti bias. This is another version of the Bee-utiful Pinafore pattern, and it has a more simplified spaghetti trim on it with the serpentine both above and at the hemline. This is a really fun dress that has a circular hem, and you can see on this one the spaghetti bias was used to create the vine and the leaves as part of the hem detail on the dress. And here we have another dress that I sell the pattern for in my Etsy shop, and you can see that the spaghetti bias is used as a substitute for the sleeves, as well as a serpentine pattern that goes along the hemline. There are many other ways you can also use spaghetti bias. Here I've used it to create the bows on this little diaper cover pattern. And you can also make flower trims. This flower was made using spaghetti bias for both the flower petal as well as the leaf, and that can be used to embellish sweaters or garments. For my demonstration today, I am going to be using this ready to smock bishop dress. I want to jazz up the hem with a little bit of spaghetti bias loop design. And so that's what I'm going to be demonstrating for you. So the first thing when you're going to use the hem as the area to embellish is to decide on the design. And like I said, I want to use a loop design on this one, and then to determine how many loops you're going to want. And this is a tiny size. This is a 3-month size dress. So I don't want too many. The first thing I did after constructing it, you need to find the center front, and this is one width of fabric, so it's approximately 42 inches. So I folded it on the center seam to find the center front, and I put a mark there. Then I folded the front and the back and matched up the seam to the front and to the back to find the side seams. Now, if you were doing a yoke dress, you would already have side seams there, but you want to ensure that the front skirt and the back skirt are the same width, and if not, just adjust that so that you're working with the same measurement front and back. That is always easiest. So once I did that, math is not really what I do best. So to find the other areas to mark, I folded the center front to the side seam to get the mark there, and I did that in each section until I had all little marks along the bottom. Once all these short marks had been determined at the hem of the skirt, then I took my large ruler and I would align a straight line with the hem line of the dress and made a vertical mark at each section. And I did that all around the skirt. The next thing you need to determine is how high above the hem you want this loop to go. I decided I wanted to go 3/4 of an inch above the hem. So I put a little cross mark at 3/4 of an inch above each one of these vertical lines around the width of the dress. The next thing to determine is how far down you want your scallop to go. And I have decided to drop down 1 inch from where the hem shadows through here. So again, 1 inch below, at approximately the center mark there, I placed a little horizontal mark just for reference. Now you can get very technical here, but since I know that all of the distances between the vertical marks are the same, I took a piece of paper, the exact width of the vertical marks. I folded this in half. As you recall, I wanted to go 1 inch below the hemline. So I put a mark right here, 1 inch below the top of the paper here. And then I take my curved ruler. You can do this freehand if you like. I feel better using my curved ruler, and just decide when you're going to get to a pretty shape. I think so. You want to align it with the corner of the page of the paper and this 1 inch mark, and draw your curve in. And then I will take my scissors and trim that away so that I have a template. Now, if you were going to be doing a lot that were going to be the identical size, you could make a template out of that Quilter's plastic template fabric. It's a lightweight plastic, and you can cut it out, and you would have a permanent template that you could use over and over again. But I find each time I do a skirt, there are slight differences, and so the paper method works for me. Then you're going to align this paper with the vertical marks on the dress, and you just draw in your scallop. And this is your reference line, so just go around the skirt drawing in all the scallops. So you can see I've drawn in all of the scallop lines around the hem, and I don't believe that I mentioned it, but you want to make sure that you align the top of the paper with where the top of the hem shadows through, because that's where you want the crossover to be for the loop. And I try to be as accurate as possible, but you don't need to get too anxious about the accuracy of this, because your spaghetti bias is going to cover these blue marks, and all the blue marks will wash out afterwards because I am using a water-soluble marking pen. So the last thing that you need to do, and I don't ever really mark this, but if you wanted to, you could, is determine your loop shape. And you can draw this in ahead of time, but your spaghetti bias sometimes wants to do its own thing. So if you feel better about drawing those loops in, you know you want the top of the loop to be at the mark that you've put above, and you do want all of your loops to be approximately the same size. So if you like that one, you can measure it, and this is maybe 5/8 apart from line to line, so you can add additional marks for accuracy if you would like to. Now you can purchase pre-made spaghetti bias, but you are rather limited in your selection. It's usually solid colors or ginghams, and sometimes there's a few prints that are available at the heirloom shops that do sell spaghetti bias. But as you can see with this dress, I've selected a pretty little lavender floral print, and I want to repeat that same print with spaghetti bias at the hem. So in this instance, I'll be making my own spaghetti bias, and I want to show you how you can do that very easily. So let's talk about bias. When you have a piece of fabric, you have the selvage, and that's usually folded together, so you've got two selvages, and in this particular gingham, I've put a snip in and I've torn the fabric to get the straight grain this way. A true bias is going to be at a 45-degree angle. And if you have gingham, it's very easy because you can fold the torn edge and match it along with one of the same color check. So I've got it on a blue line here, and this edge right here is your 45-degree angle. That is where you want to cut your bias on. And I have found the best way to get a precision cut for bias is by using a rotary cutter and a mat and your ruler. That will give you the most accurate cut. So determine how wide you want your spaghetti bias to be. These bias bands are approximately 1/4 of an inch, so if I want the spaghetti bias to be the same width as the bias bands on the dress, I would cut them about 1 1/8 of an inch wide. So I've already done that, so you don't have to watch that. But I did want to talk about joining spaghetti bias pieces together, because you are likely not going to have enough length to go around a hem with just one cut of the fabric. So here I have joined together 2 lengths of bias, and you can see that the seam is also on a 45-degree angle. And that's really what you want to have. By doing it this way, as your spaghetti bias is formed, it distributes the bulk of the seam around. It's not all in one area up and down. So that is better. And also, when you stitch this seam together, you would put your bias pieces together like this. And this seam right here, I've got a 1/4 of an inch seam. I usually shorten my stitch to about a 1.5, but this seam here is stitched on the straight of grain. Whereas if you tried to join 2 spaghetti bias pieces together that were cut just straight up and down, not only will all of your bulk be in the same place, but your straight stitch seam is on the bias, and you can see even how as I draw, how that stretches out. So that is not ideal. So if at all possible, if you've got enough fabric, you want to make sure that you cut your strips and then join them together on the bias like this. And this is a good visual reminder of how they would look when you're sewing them together. And once they're sewn together, you can clip off these little dog ears on the end so they don't distract you. And there you've got your bias trim. Now I've gone ahead and stitched off camera, but what you want to do with your spaghetti bias then is put it right sides together, and you want to stitch with just that exact 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And you want to be as accurate as possible, because if you're not accurate and your seams vary a little bit, your finished spaghetti bias is going to vary a little bit too. Maybe not terribly noticeable, but it's best to be as accurate as possible. To turn my spaghetti bias, I like to use my Fasturn. Now this is vintage. They don't come in a box like this anymore. I think they just come in a plastic package. But these are fabulous to use. I've got the set. I'm going to use this one. So it's got all these different tubes, and then it's got 3 different size turners. These make quick work of turning anything. So you want to select the tube that best fits your opening. Once you've selected the tube that best fits your opening, you're just going to slide your fabric on the tube until it all gets on the tube. Okay, so now you can see I've got my spaghetti bias packed pretty tightly on this tube. And my bias, I've got about 2.5 yards here. I don't think I could fit much more of that in. Then you're going to insert the wire into the middle of the tube, And when it comes out at the other end, hopefully you can see this, you want to twist it so that the spiral grabs the fabric. And then you gently pull on it, and you can see as you're pulling how quickly you can make this bias. And another thing I do want to mention, I do typically use fine weight thread when I'm doing most of my heirloom sewing, but you want to use regular weight thread for this. So you can see how quickly that turned, and then you just untwist this to remove it, and you've got your 2.5 yards of spaghetti bias turned. At this point, I like to let it rest a little bit, or I may even hold the steam iron slightly above it with the very edge of the seam just rolled inside. I'm not going to press this hard. I just want to steam it a little bit. I don't want to give it a hard press because I want to be able to shape it, and once you give it a hard press, it's a lot harder to get shapes with this. So I've given this a light steaming, and I've made sure that the edge, the seam line, is rolled just ever so slightly to one side so that the other side never has the opportunity for the seam to show. Now, if you knew that you were using this only for a straight application, I would recommend using these bias bars because you can stick these in, and they come in various sizes as well, but you can get a good hard press by using the bias bar, and you can do the same thing, you just slide it along as you press. So now that my bias is finished, I'm ready to apply it to the dress. If you enjoyed this video and would like to be notified when more videos are available, please hit the subscribe button below.